Alrighty, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Countless Vlogcast. My guest today is Eric Shapiro, author. How are you, Eric?
Hi, how you doing?
I'm
Thanks for
doing
having me.
well. So, tell us about yourself and who you are.
I'm from where you're from, New Jersey. So I grew up in Jersey. I'm right now in Silicon Valley in a city called Milpitas, which is right next to San Jose, California. So right now we're in the middle of fire season, and my wife and I own our local newspaper. It's called the Milpitas Beat. So right in the past couple of days, there's been historic fires. We had a historic heat wave, then we had a historic lightning storm, and there's like over 300 fires now in California. So we're dealing with that. I just this morning wrote a story about it, and but I have the window open right here, and the air doesn't smell as smoky as it does yesterday, so that's a good sign.
So, what inspired you to start that newspaper?
It was a couple things. It was my wife created it. My wife Rhoda was the founder. We moved into this city after her father passed away. We became a multi-generational household and combined homes with her mom. And the city wasn't getting a lot of local coverage. My wife has a journalism background, and they have a local paper called the Milpitas Post, which was going in the direction of more regional news. So my wife, being something of an entrepreneurial genius, saw a gap. She's like, they're not really covering Milpitas, like, city council, city hall, school board, like you're not getting the intensive coverage. So I have had a long career as a ghostwriter, a speechwriter. So she kind of recruited me. She's like, let's start our own paper. This was almost 3 years ago. Covering stuff. And lo and behold, it's worked. I mean, during the pandemic, we had to cancel our print edition, but that was kind of a blessing in disguise because it allowed us to put more energy into the online, which is where most people read it anyway. So, yeah, it was just kind of drawing on her journalism background, my general writing background. I've learned journalism on the job. I've written like 210 articles for us, and that's become pretty much what I'm busy with every day. I'm here like to talk about my fiction, but on the day job side of things, it's the newspaper.
So, what do you find differently when you're writing versus like your fictional versus writing like nonfiction, like real life stuff? Though,
Yeah,
what's the
it's
process
funny
like?
because when I started, I'm really into writing the opinion pieces for the paper because they're more literary. It's more you can be more like philosophical and psychological, and and a lot of opinion writers throughout history have been really artistic. And early on, there was a kind of a vibe in the community of like, who's this weirdo like writing these like and not flowery, but these like literary opinion pieces. I would say, but then more and more I got more muscular with the regular journalism. I still do opinions, but it's um it's more just being rigorous about the facts. It's more dry. It's more like keeping your own personality out of it. Unless sometimes I like to do like Hunter S. Thompson style, like Gonzo journalism, where I'm actually a character in the story. But I've been doing that less lately. But as the coverage has gotten more serious this year, because we're now covering the pandemic, which is an emergency, and we're covering now the fires. So like it's become a more grave form of coverage than I think anybody was expecting. So it's just more grounded, factual. Whereas with the fiction writing, it's more like it's just more, I guess, driven by emotion. Like I'm just trying to get at the emotional truth of whatever's going on, as opposed into in the newspaper. I have to kind of check that impulse. It's more like the just serving up the information.
So, what's like the feedback from like your books to like your newspaper? Like, not is it daily or is it like weekly?
It is. Well, it's yeah, more or less. I mean, sometimes like days go by and we're not posting. But I'd say every week there's between 4 and 10 articles, so it varies. We have a little team of reporters and stuff. But for the books, so I've done 8 books under my own name, and I've always gotten the schism in my career has always been I've always gotten strong reviews, but commercially they're very fringy. And I'm actually right now relaunching my whole backlist, like self-publishing it. So I, in the past year, like pulled the books from pretty good publishers. It was traditionally published. And but I decided because the newspaper worked out, and the newspaper has a big readership, I was like, you know what? I should probably take over the marketing and publication of my own fiction, which has been a jump, and which is kind of strange because when I started like 20 years ago or 18 years ago being an author, that was so taboo. Like if you self-published, you were looked down upon. It was like vanity publishing. But all of that has changed completely to the point where self-publishing is more lucrative, profitable. You control the marketing. I can buy Amazon ads. So I'm going in that direction. So I'm hoping that I can match the commerciality of the backlist to the reviews because I've always, believed in my books, and I want them to have a life and not be as fringy. And the newspaper news is a really fascinating thing because I never imagined in my life even having been a ghostwriter, I've done so many kinds of writing as a ghostwriter, like speeches, business plans, screenplays, memoirs, all this stuff, family histories. I never could have imagined being in the news. For some reason, that never crossed my mind. And I felt, my wife was utterly qualified to do it, and I've grown into it. But it's amazing. The big thing I've learned is that people get really emotional about news. Like, even if it's just a simple story that you think is just reporting on a community issue, people will get upset if you didn't cover it the way they wanted, or if you didn't quote the right person they thought should have been included, or if your point of emphasis was a little different from what they expected. And it's amazing. It's like, and I started realizing, I'm like, wow, news really does get to people. Like, whereas if I just write a short story, like a horror story, I've never seen, like, it just lives in a different cultural space, so it just never gets the same reaction. So news, positive or negative, people are always fired up. Like, we hear a lot of good things, and it's cool because now in our city, my wife and I are known, so it's cool. Like, people approach me in public, less now because I'm sheltering in place, but they approach me and they're like, they say, "Oh, I loved your piece," or "I hated your piece," or "I disagree with it," but it's fun. So in general, I'd say 70 to 75% of the feedback is positive. But then you have, there are people that are always like, "You're not investigating this. You got to cover this more. You got to be harder on this politician." So it's interesting, but we do the best we can.
So in terms of your recent book, though, what's the name of your recent book and what inspired that too? And have you ever had anybody like read your book and your newspaper at the same time, or like, I know you have readership, but has anybody read your book and newspaper?
Yeah, that's what's starting to happen, which is interesting, is because I'm kind of known for these crazy opinions, which are political, and then my new novel, which is called Red Dennis, is kind of political, and it's about a guy that becomes radicalized, he becomes unhinged, he turns to violence. It's kind of like that movie Falling Down with Michael Douglas from the 90s. Like, it's just a guy snaps, and there's political overtones to it. So a lot of people that were following the paper picked it up. So that was cool. Like, I would get texts from them holding my book and stuff. So it's cool. And the subjects do kind of overlap. And there was a curiosity among them about the book because they know I've taken political positions that are always, it's not that they're unpopular, but sometimes, they stir up a conversation. They can be a little provocative. So this book, which is like a dark fiction book, is intended to be that much more stimulating. So it's almost like the newspaper became something of a platform to help sell the book, which was nice.
Great. So what's behind the title though? Like, what is the title of the Red Dennis? Like,
there's a few meanings. Like, the guy's middle-aged and he's having like a midlife crisis. He's unhappy with his family. He's a narcissist. So like, his glory days were back when he was a wrestler in high school. And they used to call him Red Dennis because his blood pressure would get high during the matches and his skin would turn pink. So his nickname was Red Dennis, and he's like the only person that still remembers that. And he's still, like, in his head, he's still Red Dennis. But then there's other meanings in the sense that there's a few things going on at once. Like, he's getting angry, so he's like seeing red. So there's that. And then there's also, like, he's becoming, like, he's a left-wing guy. He's a Democrat. He's running for city council as a Democrat. But he starts getting radicalized and he starts drifting to the right. So it's like red in the Republican sense. And so it's all those kinds of things.
Great. So in terms of what makes you different than other authors, like in like dark fiction and fiction, like what makes you like?
Yeah, that was a tough one. Like, when I read that question over email, I was like stumped because I was like, it's hard. It's a really good question, but I'm like, I'm always embarrassed about like saying anything too positive about myself. But I think I try and whip it up so it's really fast. Like, it's like I try and not even have too much of a build. Like with all my books, I want there to be suspense from the first page to the last. So it's just like completely immersive tension throughout the whole experience. That's usually the goal, at least in terms of technique and style. And then in terms of substance, I'm all over the place. Like, I've written a book about suicide cult. I've written books about the apocalypse. I wrote a sci-fi book about a robot that like is like programmed to love somebody, then she falls out of love with him. So I've explored different things, but there's always there's that unifying thing where I'm trying to make it like right from that first paragraph, there's some hook that creates an air of suspense and that sustains until you're done.
So what's like your process of writing? Are you more like a pantser, planner? Like, do you look at a blank sheet, like, all of a sudden throw words at, then you edit it and like boom, you got a book? Or what's your process?
It's let me think. On the plotter or pantser thing, it's a little bit of both. I would say it's like 60% plotter. Like, I need to know enough of like what the parameters are and where it's going. So I might not have an outline, but I might have like a list of important things that have to happen to get me from here to there. And then once I'm in there, I'm open to changes. Like, because I usually use a first person narrator. So usually that person ends up running the show and like surprising me. I'm like, in the heat of the moment, it's like, oh, he's not going to do this. He's going to do that. Or I think he's going to do something violent. Like with Red Dennis, there are moments where I think he's going to do something really violent, then he doesn't. And it's like part of me as the author, I'm like, oh no, that would be too extreme. That's not realistic. And like, so there's the author brain, but then the character brain is also like, no, that's too impulsive. So that's interesting. So I become a pantser in that regard. And then I usually edit, like, I just did another book last year called Ass Plus Seat, which is all about the writing process. And I edited that book like 30 times, which was extreme for me. Like, I think I was nervous because it's a book about writing. So I was like, all right, this has to be utterly credible. Like, I didn't let one like punctuation mark go by. And I usually try not to. But with Red Dennis, usually it's like half a dozen edits. Like, I'm not one of these writers. Like, I'm so about the emotion that I feel if you edit it too many times, like, of course you don't want there to be loose ends or loopholes or inconsistencies, or of course it needs to be grammatically as sharp as possible and stylish, and so all these things I'm taking care of. But I am also on the other end very protective of the emotion. So I feel if you edit too many times, the emotion dries up and it becomes overcooked and it becomes a little stale. At least for me, I know there are other people that edit like 50 times and like they feel like they're not finding it until they keep going. But for me, I want the feeling of spontaneity and the metabolism to still be there.
So you say like the way you price your process is like in between like perfect and imperfect too. So how do you find that like balance for you, like personally?
Like how do I hit the sweet spot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to find as like a writer, because you want people to like in our minds, like you want people to like make it like read it and like get what you're saying too, but at the same time you want to like have your perspective too,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm definitely very meticulous on a sentence by sentence basis. Like I want everything to be sculpted and crafted and clean and sharp and impeccable. Like I definitely, to the point where it almost hurts when I'm editing. Like it's just like obsessive compulsive, like managing every little semicolon and paragraph break. And it's very, I want it to be very crisp and sculpted. On the other hand, I guess underneath, here's a good way of putting it. There's some writers that write tight, but then everything underneath is tight too. So it's like they have a tight style, but then they have a tight story. So the story is like very like a bed that's made with hospital corners. Like everything is very logically, constructed, and that can make it a bit two dimensional because real life is so erratic and chaotic and unpredictable. So I always like the analogy I always use is like real tightness should be like a stocking on a leg. Like it shouldn't be just like a stocking on a mannequin, which is tightness on top of tightness. Like a leg is like fleshy and has meat and has blood. It's juicy. It's like it's alive. So if you're gonna write tight, you have to write on top of chaos. Like the tightness needs to wrap itself around something very potent and emotional and that actually moves for it to actually register as like like it has. So there's it gets traction. Like there has to be some friction. So I try and take care of the surface in terms of the grammar and everything's clean and it's, and I try and polish it to a high level. But in terms of that sweet spot you're talking about, there has to be, I like the story itself and the characters to be kind of ragged, almost like, there should be ambiguities and paradoxes within the characters, like just so it's as lifelike as possible. And I think that also makes it more emotional. That if the, on the character side of things, it's like you can't ever quite completely pin them down and they're kind of eternal on some level. I think that'll add more realism.
Great. So it's a two-part question. How do you decide between self-publishing and going to a publisher traditional route? And what's your method of like branding and like promoting yourself after your like book, like the business side of it too?
Oh, totally. The self-publishing was a really long decision. Like it took me forever. And I'm still like, I'm 42 now. So I'm still like of a generation where part of me is still stuck in the mentality that I don't take it that seriously. Because, I was proud to be able to compete and sell books to publishers. And it's really hard to do so. Like your odds are pretty bad when you actually sell one. It's like 10,000 to 1. So whenever I accomplished that, I felt really, really strong and good. The problem is like, the real paradox is they don't really market you almost every time. Like I've worked with so many publishers. Some of them do more marketing than others, but the expectation is that you're still kind of on your own when it comes to marketing. So that was the big thing. It's like, well, if I'm going to market myself and I'm only taking like a small piece of the profits, it's sort of like the snake is eating its own tail. Like traditional publishing really only works unless if the author has a pre-existing platform. Like Red Dennis was traditionally published by a really cool publisher called Independent Legions in Italy, and I love them. I mean, the formatting, the artwork. I was really flattered to be there. They've published stories by like Stephen King, Neil Gaiman. Like, it's a huge career win. I mean, I'm flattered to be a part of it. It's also my first full-length novel. Like, my other stuff is all novellas, so I'm happy that lives in that space, and that's all good. But for the backlist, I felt like a lot of those like never had their shot. Like, it was the same pattern over and over again with the marketing. And then eventually what woke me up was really the newspaper, because it's a family newspaper. We have reporters, we have a staff, we have an assistant. Like, it's a real company. On the other hand, not on the other hand, but the fact of the matter is it's self-publishing. It's just like, we are doing the editorial side of things. We're doing the formatting. We actually do it, and it works. It has, like, every month there are probably 30,000 unique visitors to the website. So it has a real readership in its community. It's the main source of news. So building that over time, I was like, it really does. It will pay to, I hope to bring the other stuff to my own label. So the stuff, it's called Chi Media Company that owns our newspaper. So I just started doing Chi Media books, and my father had done a book years ago. I brought his back, and my mom and I did children's books. So I turned it into a family thing. So we started publishing all these titles, and now it's a matter of another real impetus to do it was, I guess, Amazon finally, it was called Amazon Marketing Services. Now it's called Amazon Advertising. Like, it took, everybody's waiting for them to do that for like decades. And they finally have their own ad platform. That was a big part of the decision too, because for the newspaper, for my ghostwriting company, which lasted for years, which actually still exists, and I was a founding partner of, but I shifted to the newspaper. We always use digital ads to real success, and they're awesome. Like, because you can target to your buyer with keywords. So I figure I want to give this stuff as good a shot as possible. So that, and it's easier to do it if you're self-publishing it. You can just hit the button, as opposed to lobbying for your publisher to do it, and then they don't have the money, and maybe you give them the money, but maybe you're not sure what they're going to do with it. So it was all those factors combined. The final thing on that was on the first part of the question, was a lot of the publishers, in addition to expecting me to do the marketing, the formatting. Like, I always historically, with almost every book except for one, had formatting problems. Like, I'd get the galleys back, and I'd have to send them like a 4-page list of, all right, you got to correct this. This paragraph's not indented. This chapter starts at the bottom of a page. And it's like, wait, why am I stressing about this? And why am I doing this? And it's like, at a certain point, it's like, I may as well be the publisher. So it's just things like that. And as far as the marketing, like the newspaper, I'm visible through the newspaper, through the editorials. So that is something of a platform. But the main thing I'm going to do with these self-published backlist titles is the digital advertising.
Great. So, who is your audience though when you like write these books? Though I know you've written different genres, like you talked about suicide and the apocalypse, and talked about politics too. So, what do you like when you're writing? What do you think like your audience is? Do you have like a target audience? Or you just like write and then like hopefully people like get attached to that book, or like what's that for you?
It's a really good question. I'm learning more about this because I was just putting the keywords together for the ads that we're about to launch. So they're all linked by horror. I mean, it's interesting because I don't think I've ever sat down, aside from the apocalyptic ones, which is a subgenre of horror. I don't think I've ever sat down and been like, I'm going to write a horror book. And not that I have any issue with it. Like, I love horror books and horror movies. I love Stephen King growing up. So I'm all about it. But I never thought it was like my favorite genre. The truth is, all my stuff is dark. And there's suspense, and it's disturbing on some level. So it always gets bundled under horror. Like, and there is a political dimension, especially to the new one, but it's been there in other ones too. So if people are interested in that, that's there too. But I think you can also enjoy the stuff just as a story. But yeah, horror, it's like the horror community has always welcomed me. Even when I made a couple films too, and those movies always get blanketed under horror. So that is really what it all rolls back to.
Great. So from like March to like now, with the quarantine like beginning to, how has it like evolved like in affect your creativity, like from the beginning to like the middle to like enacted now too? Was it like the beginning, like how did it affect your creativity? Was it like positive, negative, and what do you hope to accomplish like in the present time?
Good question. Okay, so let me think about this. When it started, I
think it was March.
Yeah, around March, right? Yeah. It was the I think I was like on an adrenaline kick. Like, not that I was enjoying it, I was nervous, but when it started, I had more energy for it. Like, I was like, all right, I have 2 kids. we pulled them out of school. We started doing homeschooling, etc., or not homeschooling, but distance learning. And I think, I was sort of like, not like I expected it would end quickly, because I really wasn't one of those. I didn't think it would be over in a couple months, but I felt like I had like a burst of energy. I actually worked on a screenplay. I'll break a little news. I don't know if you know who Greg F. Giffun is. He's a really powerful horror author, and he's he's a dear friend of mine. And I adapted his book Long After Dark, which I love, which is a complete masterpiece. It's about a guy. It's I don't know how old it is. It might be from like 2012. I can't remember, but it's about a guy who's home. He's down with like a super flu, and he's home, and he's like, dealing with the flu, and his wife is away on a business trip, and he's paranoid that she might be cheating on him, and he's got like people around the house bothering him. It's very like paranoid surrealism. So I had always wanted to do a movie version of that, and then I adapted the script, and with Greg's support and input, and I was really excited about that. And I think I did that. I can't remember quite when. It was like April or May. And in the midst of that, I'm working on the newspaper every day, which has an element of creativity to it, but it's mostly, as you said, like nonfiction. It's not the same thing. And then I realized, as time went on, like now the mode I'm in now in August is more like a crash mode. Like in between, the good thing was, in addition to having adapted that script, there was also my books. I finally had the time, because I'm home so much, to finally get these books completed for publication. Like it took a long time. Like our assistant at the newspaper was helping me with the formatting, and each process was real painstaking, and we got new cover art, we had to get ISBNs. Like I was really learning all the self-publishing stuff. So that was fortuitous for me that I'm not going out in the evenings, like we're not going on trips, we're not doing basketball with my kids anymore, all these things. So since I'm home so much, I was actually able to get all that done. And we have the final title, which is called The Devoted, which is about a suicide cult, is almost ready. And then that whole backlist will be finished. So that was really positive. So it wasn't out and out creativity, but at least I was able to finally do that, which I'd wanted to for over a year. Also the children's books. So all that stuff, we finally brought it into publishable form. And then now I'm sort of like in a crash mode. As we're here in like late summer, I'm sort of like, all right, I can't stand this anymore. Like I'm really, cabin fever, like climbing the walls. Like it didn't hit me early, and I kind of feel bad. Like I know certain people that were like freaked out like in the first 2 weeks, and I'm sort of an anxious person to begin with. I'm a highly anxious person to begin with, so it didn't like affect me that way. I'm like, well, this is like just a little worse than things usually are. Like I'm always worried about something, right? So it's like and then there were some people that were like freaking out, and I was like, wow, they're really overreacting. But I feel bad now, because now I'm in a mode, especially we just had a heat wave, and now we have fires, and of course the pandemic hasn't stopped. So now I'm in a mode where I'm like, all right, this really is terrible. Like this has got to stop. Like we need a break. So so I'm not feeling terribly creative at the moment. Doing the news articles and keeping the public informed and all that stuff. But on the creative side of things, I'm sort of in a holding pattern.
So if you could give advice to young authors out there, authors struggling, because I know you've done like a lot of different like sub genres and different you have like a whole range of writing, newspaper, film, and like authorship. So if you give advice out there to younger authors out there and writers and authors struggling out there, that'd be great.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. The first thing I always say when people ask me that is, and this sounds kind of banal, but I think this is the fundamental thing, is to take care of every single sentence. Like don't be, especially because my follow-up advice to that is probably you should self-publish at this point. Like my wife, who's a really amazing writer, just she also got a book published. It was before I'd finished Red Dennis, and I got the publisher in Italy. She actually inspired me to aim higher, because she wrote a book called Fierce Woman, which is all women's empowerment and exercises for women, and it got an amazing publisher called Llewellyn, they're like 110 years old, and she's like the exception. They also paid her a really good advance, but with her, she has a really strong platform. Like she has like 18,000 YouTube followers. She does meditation and yoga exercises online, and I think they were attracted to her. They were attracted to her book, but it was also the platform helped make the sale, which kind of goes to the larger point of like, she was pre-platform. She was already visible. They knew they could already use that to market. And I feel I have a semblance of that now with the paper. But I think in general, you should self-publish in this day and age. I think everything is going in that direction. It also will lead to like not compromising. Like if you want to mash genres, like so many of my books can't be put in one genre. Like it's usually 2 or 3. So if you want to be weird or alternative or different, and not just like follow the formula that everybody does, I would say definitely like lean towards self-publishing. But of a piece with that, you have to take really good care with making sure the writing is really jacked. It's really formidable. It's really professional. Like, don't be one of the ones that makes that gives self-publishing a bad name. And great cover art. If you can get blurbs, endorsements, and things, like you want to come as strong as you can to build that end of things. But I really think the future. I think like in legacy media is so being caught up on by do-it-yourself media in a way that I don't even think most people understand. And I think in another generation, legacy media will in a lot of ways be like quaint, like something like senior citizens are into. But most artists, especially if you're like quote unquote like true artist, like you're doing something new, like I think you're going to be doing your own distribution and so forth.
Great. So to wrap it up, just plug yourself too: social media, websites, recent projects, coming up projects, all that.
Yeah. So the new one is my novel Red Dentist. There's also the nonfiction book S Plus C. I generally talk to I'm always kicking around with other authors and readers in the horror community and the Milpitas community. It's a real mishmash on my Facebook page. So I'm always there joking around and stuff. And what else? And then I would go to Chi Media. We just launched this. I believe it is chimediacompany.com. CHImediacompany.com is where there's links to all the books. There's some stuff on my movie projects, and then just general stuff about our company, which runs our newspaper. And the newspaper is the Milpitas, so it's MILPITAS beat.com, which is news for our city, but it's also regional for the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and so forth.
Great. So where can people find you at? Like, what's your social media tags? Twitter, website?
The main one is Facebook. It's interesting. I was on Instagram for a while, which never like clicked for my books. Like my wife has momentum with Instagram because her stuff is more visual with crystals, but Facebook is definitely the spot in terms of where I connect with readers and fellow authors and all that stuff.
Great. Thank you for coming on, man, sharing your story and your journey and everything.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
This has been the Countless Vlogcast with my guest Eric Shapiro. Thank you guys for watching. You can rewatch this on YouTube.